back to full health. And I feel like probably over these last couple of weeks is when I've probably started feeling my best. Obviously, my ankle kind of didn't allow me to really see where.
No one in women's basketball was entirely ready for what transpired within the Team USA program. Midway through the competition, a head coach vanished from the sidelines without providing a clear public explanation. Almost overnight, a new voice took control, and in a matter of hours, Bukers-Clark transformed from a bench player to the offense's main driver. The interim coach at the center of it all has now verified exactly what happened and what this staff had been doing to Clark behind closed doors. Fans noticed right away, and the internet went crazy. They didn't want to reveal the whole tale. You must return to the beginning of this moment in order to comprehend why it struck so deeply. Bukers-Clark initially put on her shoes as a member of the USA basketball women's senior national team during a training camp in Durham, North Carolina, in December. This was more than a routine exercise. It was the first clear indication of her future in the red, white, and blue. Kara Lawson, the head coach, was recently selected to oversee the program through the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. Stephanie White, the head coach of the Indiana Fever, Natalie Nakasi, the coach of the Golden State Valkyries, and Nate Tibbitz, the head coach of the Phoenix Mercury, were among her assistants. A laden bench, on paper. In reality, this configuration would subtly lead to one of the most talked about plots of the qualifying run. At that camp in December, Clark was doing everything correctly behind closed doors. After a terrible 2026 WNBA season in which she played in just 13 games, she was rebuilding her body while working with medical personnel and training under development coaches. Plagued by a series of lower body injuries that prevented one of the sport's most explosive players from playing basketball for over a full year. The WNBA All-Star Game had been missed by her. The playoffs had eluded her. Without her, she had watched from the sidelines while the Indiana Fever advanced far in the postseason. Nevertheless, Clark appeared to be herself once more when the cameras rolled at that Durham camp, locked in, energized, and prepared. The anxiety that was subtly growing over how she would be utilized once the game started was something that the cameras were unable to properly capture. In March 2026, Puerto Rico will host the FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying event. These 5 qualifying games in San Juan were essentially a formality because Team USA had already secured a spot in the World Cup in Germany by winning the AmeriCup the previous summer. Formality or not, the stakes seemed very high, since Paige Bueckers, Angel Reese, and Bukers-Clark were making their senior national team debuts. Together, 3 of the most well-known figures in women's basketball are making their debut on the global scene. Massive crowds of fans turned out, social media was buzzing, and everyone in the basketball world was eager to see how Lawson would use her new generation of stars. Everyone was completely taken aback by what happened in the first 2 games. Lawson arrived with a mentality that she candidly referred to as a mission of fact-finding. She was using a system where 5 players left and 5 returned on a virtually mechanical schedule, akin to hockey shifts, and she was heavily rotating all 12 players on the roster. Clark was assigned to the second unit, not the first 5. Ryan Howard, Monique Billings, Kelsey Plum, and Kiki Iriefin were all on the bench with her. Every game, the veteran starting lineup, which included Chelsea Gray, Jackie Young, Kalia Copper, Darica Hamby, and a rotating front court, was solidified as the opening unit. Questions were immediately raised by the optics. For her part, Clark managed it with the poise of someone who is familiar with the task. She came off the bench in the first game against Senegal and was outstanding. With 17 points and 12 assists, the USA's opening performance broke international records. In just 1 quarter, she established the offensive tone for the entire squad. Following the event, Lawson acknowledged it, describing Clark as one of the world's most dynamic playmakers and applauding how she instantly increased the tempo and effectiveness of everything around her. Nevertheless, Clark continued in the second unit, and the rotation-heavy style was maintained for the second game against Puerto Rico. In a convincing victory, Clark delivered once more, contributing 12 points and 5 assists. The figures were exceptional. There was no denying the effect. However, the surrounding construction remained unaltered. Supporters were irritated. It was boiling over on social media. People started repeatedly posing the same query. Why? When it was obvious that Clark was the most captivating player on the court. Was she being prevented from properly utilizing the offensive scheme and starting position? The coach then departed. At this point, the narrative takes a dramatic turn that no one could have predicted. Lawson had always intended to go back to Duke. She was coaching the Blue Devils in the NCAA tournament at the same time. Even before the qualifying round began, this dual role was under question. Lawson left the sidelines when Duke's schedule required her to return, and Nate Tibbitz, the head coach of the Phoenix Mercury, filled in for her during the last games. Although the changeover was presented as planned and formal, the court's subsequent actions revealed a very different picture. Tibbitz entered the picture and changed the philosophy almost instantly. The inflexible 5 in 5 out rotation was vanished. Regardless of what the lineup combinations were really delivering, the established hierarchy that maintained the same veteran starting 5 was no longer in place. Caitlin Clark was the first to gain from the replacement, which appeared to be much more like merit-based basketball. The initial 5 of Team USA struggled right away in the match against Italy. The offense was totally stalled after 3 minutes. Italy had blocked passing lanes, crowded the paint, and challenged the Americans to beat them. It was unbreakable by the initial unit. Tibbitz then called number 22 while glancing along the bench. At the 6, Clark entered 46 points in the first quarter. Real-time viewers described what transpired as nothing less than a takeover. Team USA scored 23 points in the approximately 6.5 minutes while Clark was leading the offense. The starters had scored 5 points in the 3 minutes prior to her. To put it in perspective, not only does the math favor Clark, but it calls out her name. The moment she touched the ball, the geometry of the court changed. Prior to her appearance, Italy's defense was at ease and composed, but now they were rushing to cover ground they hadn't anticipated. That day, Clark ended with 12 points and 5 assists, helping Team USA win 93-59. However, this is what set Tibbitz apart and was quickly embraced by supporters and commentators. He discussed the lineup changes in addition to making them. Tibbitz stood at the platform and said that the prior strategy had not been ideal, with a candor that is actually uncommon for coaches working in professional settings where every public comment is monitored and filtered. Dismiss Lawson outright, but he made it abundantly evident that the team's top playmakers should be the focal point of the offense and that roles should be stable. He underlined that the team played at its best when there was clarity, when players understood their roles, and when the offensive scheme was designed to make the most of the best players on the team rather than allocate minutes in a democratic manner. The significance of what he was saying was recognized by members of the media. This was effectively a coach confirming what the box scores had been indicating for days, that Clark's powers had not been unlocked by the system in place prior to his arrival. It landed like a headline even though he didn't yell it or make it one. The next chapter began with a match against New Zealand. Tibbitz started Clark this time. She accompanied Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, Monique Billings, and Dorica Hamby from tip-off for the first time in the competition. The outcome was precisely what those advocating for this reform had anticipated. Team USA crushed New Zealand with confidence and command. Clark orchestrated from the top of the key, scoring 14 points on effective shooting, making flawless free throws, and providing a team-high 6 assists in just 23 minutes. The offense advanced more quickly. The ball found players who were free. The spacing was perfect, precisely what was required. Additionally, Clark was totally at ease in a role that suited her true strengths for the first time in the competition. Even casual watchers were noting on how drastically different it was from the first 2 games. It was more than just a lineup change, it was a declaration of what this team could become if it stopped being hesitant about giving its finest players complete freedom. That was not the end of it. Tibbitz made another move later in the competition that completely ignited social media. He paired Paige Bukers and Clark in the backcourt. 2 of the most talented playmakers of their generation sharing the floor at the same time, both able to create from anywhere, both able to shoot from 30 feet, and both able to see passes that most players don't even recognize as options, was what parent supporters had been speculating about for months. An offensive clinic was the outcome. The math of defending becomes almost impossible when those two are on the court together. Driving lanes automatically open, and open shooters appear on every possession. When the offensive strategy is based on less dynamic ball handlers, the paint becomes accessible in ways that it just isn't. It was the type of on-court evidence that provides conclusive answers to questions through outcomes rather than argument. Additionally, Tibbitz recognized that pairing as a valid weapon rather than treating it as a curiosity. Now, it's critical to be clear about something that might be overlooked in the whirlwind of social media rumors and fan indignation. There was no plot against Caitlin Clark and Kara Lawson's initial plan. Lawson has always made it clear that the purpose of these qualifying games was to gather information. Her goal was to assess various lineups, determine which players complemented which ones, and establish the groundwork for what Team USA will look like in preparation for the 2028 Olympics and the World Cup in Berlin. With players coming in from their individual WNBA off-seasons and no regular games, it makes sense to rotate everyone and see how the pieces fit together. In actuality, it's how you responsibly develop a software over time. Even when Lawson rotated Clark around the second unit, she consistently complimented her and made it apparent that she recognized the type of player she was working with. However, Tibbitz, operating in a condensed time frame with less need to assess and more urgency to win, just took the decision that the data was suggesting since the results on the floor painted a tale that was difficult to deny. The conflict at the core of this whole issue is that there are two valid coaching theories, and one of them gave Clark less freedom than she deserved. The fan response to everything developed into a plot that was nearly as extensive as the actual games. Social media erupted with suspicions that the coaching staff was purposefully restricting Clark's effect when Lawson first kept him in the second unit, either out of envy, favoritism toward veterans, or some internal power struggle that no one was fully addressing publicly. Fans scrutinized Clark's body language and facial emotions frame by frame as photos of her standing close to Stephanie White, her Indiana Fever head coach and Team USA assistant, went viral. Viewers were certain they could detect a trace of strain in those exchanges. Following White's alleged public remarks portraying Kelsey Mitchell as the team's top offensive priority, which infuriated some Clark supporters, comments rushed in indicating that White and Clark had unresolved issues from their time together with the Eagles. It is impossible to confirm from the outside whether any of that had anything to do with what was taking place on the Puerto Rican court, but the impression was genuine. In the era of social media, perception has a tendency to become its own form of proof for those who are predisposed to believe it. Before any member of the team ever spoke, the story began to take shape. Tibbitz' real line of decisions and his remarks at the podium both corroborated this, is that from the beginning there was a discrepancy between how Clark was being used and how she could have been used. He made no accusations against anyone. It was not framed by him as dysfunction. However, he accepted the change, gave an explanation, and then allowed the scoreboard speak for itself. In the tournament, Team USA finished 5-0. Throughout the qualifying run, Clark led the team in assists, recorded an incredible +80+ dash, and made 7 of 13 three-pointers in each of the 5 games. After missing 8 months due to injury, she returned to competitive basketball, and right away, she appeared to be the team's most complete two-way initiator. The figures do not represent a tiny sample anomaly. In international competition, they are an ongoing battle against disciplined, physical defenses for the duration of a tournament. She took over games after coming off the bench. Blowouts were initiated and coordinated by her. She has exceptional